The envelope slipped under my apartment door at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and I almost stepped on it rushing to get my coffee started. The official letterhead made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Notice of lease violation, noise complaints was printed in bold letters across the top, and as I read the details, my hands started shaking. According to the apartment management, I had received multiple complaints about excessive noise, loud music, and disruptive behavior, occurring at all hours of the day and night. The letter threatened lease termination if the issues weren't resolved immediately. I stared at the paper in complete bewilderment. I'm probably the quietest tenant in this entire building. I work from home as a freelance editor, I don't own a television, and the loudest thing in my apartment is my ancient coffee grinder that I only use once each morning. If you enjoy dramatic life stories like this one, smash that like button and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from. My name is Carmen Gonzalez. I'm 52 years old, and I've lived in this modest 2-bedroom apartment for almost 6 years without a single complaint. I keep to myself, I'm respectful of my neighbors, and I've never even had a late rent payment. This violation notice felt like being accused of a crime I didn't commit. I immediately called my daughter, Rosa Gonzalez, who works as a paralegal downtown and has always been my voice of reason during stressful situations. At 28, she inherited my analytical mind, but paired it with a fierce protective streak that emerges whenever someone tries to mess with our family. "Mom, this is absolutely ridiculous," Rosa said after I read her the entire letter over the phone. "You practically tiptoe around that apartment. Remember last month when you called me whispering because you thought your neighbor might be sleeping at 2 in the afternoon? I just don't understand where this is coming from," I told her, pacing between my kitchen and living room. "The letter says the complaints have been coming in for weeks. Multiple complaints, Rosa. Someone is actively calling the management office and reporting me for things I'm not doing." "Have you talked to any of your neighbors directly? Maybe there's been some kind of misunderstanding about which apartment the noise is actually coming from." That's when I thought of my friend Denise Crawford, who lives just 3 buildings over in the same complex. Denise and I have been close friends for about 2 years now. We met at the community garden behind the leasing office, bonding over our shared frustration with the property management's inconsistent maintenance schedule. She's become one of my most trusted confidants, someone I share everything with from work stress to family concerns. "I should talk to Denise," I told Rosa. "She knows everyone in this complex, and she's always plugged into the gossip. If someone's been making noise complaints, she would definitely know about it." Within an hour, I was knocking on Denise's door, still clutching the violation notice. She answered wearing her usual bright floral housecoat, her gray hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. At 49, Denise has this warm, maternal energy that immediately makes you feel comfortable, which is probably why I've always found it so easy to confide in her. "Carmen, honey, you look absolutely frazzled," she said, ushering me inside. Her apartment always smells like vanilla candles and fresh laundry, creating this cozy atmosphere that usually calms my nerves instantly. "Denise, I need your help with something really strange," I began, settling into her familiar floral armchair. "I got this lease violation notice this morning for noise complaints, but I know I haven't been making any noise. Someone has been calling the apartment management repeatedly, claiming I'm disturbing other tenants." I watched her face carefully as I explained the situation, looking for any sign of recognition or insight. Denise has lived in this complex for over 5 years, and she seems to know every piece of drama and every personality conflict between neighbors. Her network of information is usually incredibly reliable. "Oh my goodness, that's terrible," she said, her voice full of concern. "You're absolutely right to be confused, Carmen. You're probably the most considerate neighbor any of us could ask for. I can't imagine who would make up stories like that about you. The thing is, The management letter was very specific about timing and types of noise. Whoever's making these complaints knows details about my daily routine. They mentioned early morning disturbances around 7 a.m., which is exactly when I make my coffee. They complained about evening noise around 9 p.m., which is when I usually do my dishes after dinner. Denise nodded sympathetically, refilling my coffee cup. It sounds like someone who lives very close to you. Someone who can hear your normal daily activities and is choosing to report them as disturbances. Have you had any conflicts with immediate neighbors recently? Anyone who might have a reason to want you out of your apartment? That's just it. I barely interact with my neighbors beyond polite hallway greetings. I can't think of anyone who would have a problem with me, let alone someone who would actively try to get me evicted. I stayed at Denise's apartment for almost 2 hours, going through every possible explanation and every neighbor who might have access to my daily schedule. She was incredibly helpful, offering to ask around discreetly and see if anyone had heard gossip about noise complaints in my building. Later that afternoon, I met with my neighbor Patricia Reeves from across the hall. Patricia is 34 and works as a night shift nurse, so she's home during the day and would definitely notice if there were actual noise issues. She's also become a good friend over the years, someone I trust to give me honest feedback. Patricia, I need to ask you something directly, I said when she opened her door. Have you heard excessive noise coming from my apartment? Loud music, disruptive sounds, anything that would justify noise complaints? She looked genuinely surprised by the question. Carmen, are you kidding? I barely know you're there most days. You're so quiet, I sometimes wonder if you've gone out of town. Why are you asking? I showed her the violation notice, and her expression shifted from confusion to anger. This is complete nonsense. Whoever filed these complaints is lying. I'm home during the day more than most people because of my work schedule, and I would absolutely notice if you were making the kind of noise they're describing here. The management company says they've received multiple complaints over several weeks. Someone has been systematically reporting me for normal daily activities like making coffee and washing dishes. Carmen, this feels personal, Patricia said, reading through the letter again. Someone knows your routine well enough to report specific times and activities. This isn't a neighbor who's genuinely disturbed by noise. This is someone who wants you out of this apartment for some reason. That evening, I called Rosa again to update her on my conversations with Denise and Patricia. My daughter's legal training kicked in immediately, and she started asking pointed questions about who had access to information about my daily schedule. Mom, think about this systematically. Who knows what time you make coffee every morning? Who knows when you typically do your evening dishes? Who would know these details well enough to report them as noise complaints? Well, anyone who lives close enough to hear my normal activities, I suppose. But Patricia confirmed that my routine isn't actually disruptive or excessive. Right, so we're not talking about someone who's genuinely bothered by noise. We're talking about someone who's using your normal activities as ammunition for false complaints. That suggests a personal motivation, rather than a legitimate grievance. As I lay in bed that night, replaying every conversation and analyzing every detail, a disturbing thought began forming in my mind. The timing of the complaints was too precise, too knowledgeable about my personal habits. Suddenly, the pieces aligned. The next morning, I decided to do something I'd never done before in 3 years of living here. I made a point of listening carefully to the sounds in my building. I wanted to understand exactly what normal apartment living sounded like, what my neighbors could reasonably hear from my unit. I started my usual morning routine, but this time, I paid attention to every sound I made. The coffee maker's gentle gurgling, the soft clink of my spoon stirring in cream, the quiet whoosh of water running in the sink. Even straining to listen, these sounds seemed barely audible beyond my own kitchen. But as I stood there, I became aware of other sounds filtering through the building. Mrs. Chen upstairs was clearly moving furniture around. Heavy scraping sounds followed by what sounded like a vacuum cleaner. Someone down the hall had their television turned up loud enough that I could make out dialogue from what sounded like a morning talk show. A dog was barking persistently somewhere on my floor. The contrast was striking. If these genuinely noisy activities weren't generating complaints, why were my nearly silent morning routines being reported as disturbances? Around 10 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Rosa, calling during what I knew was a brief break in her court schedule. "Mom, I've been thinking about this situation all night, and I want to walk through something with you. Can you tell me exactly who knows your daily routine well enough to predict when you'll be making coffee or doing dishes?" "Well, let me think," I said, settling into my chair with my second cup of coffee. "Patricia knows I'm an early riser because we've chatted in the hallway in the mornings, but she's already confirmed she's never heard excessive noise from my apartment." "Right. Who else?" "The maintenance staff, I suppose. But they've never been in my apartment during my morning routine. Management has no reason to know my personal schedule?" I paused, thinking harder. Rosa, the only person who knows my routine in that kind of detail, is someone who's spent significant time in my apartment, watching how I live my daily life. Keep going with that thought, Mom. Who has that level of access to your personal habits? The realization was creeping up on me like cold water, but I wasn't ready to voice it yet. Melissa has been here frequently over the past few months. She knows I always make coffee first thing in the morning. She knows I do my dishes right after dinner because she's commented on it, said she admires how I keep everything so tidy. And when did these complaints start, relative to when Melissa began spending more time at your apartment? I walked over to my kitchen calendar, where I keep track of social visits and appointments. Rosa, she's been coming over almost weekly since about 2 months ago. She said she was feeling lonely, that she needed a friend to talk to regularly. I was happy to help. Mom, I need to ask you something difficult. Has Melissa ever expressed any negative feelings about your living situation? Has she ever commented on your rent, or this neighborhood, or suggested you should live somewhere else? I sank back into my chair, my coffee growing cold as uncomfortable memories surfaced. Actually, yes. She's made several comments about how I'm wasting money on rent when I could be saving for a house down payment. She suggested I should consider moving in with a roommate to split costs or find a cheaper place outside the city. And how did you respond to those suggestions? I told her I love this apartment and this neighborhood. I explained that I budget carefully and I can comfortably afford my rent. I said I value my independence and privacy, and I'm not interested in having a roommate at this stage of my life. Rosa was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear her lawyer's mind working through the implications. When she spoke again, her voice was careful and controlled. Mom, I want you to think about Melissa's reactions when you've declined her suggestions about moving. Has she seemed to accept your decisions, or has she continued pushing the topic? She's brought it up multiple times, even after I've made it clear I'm not interested in changing my living situation. Just 2 weeks ago, she mentioned a rental house she'd seen that would be perfect for me, even though it was in a completely different part of town, far from everything I enjoy about living here. And these noise complaints started around the same time as these conversations about your housing choices? I felt sick to my stomach as the timeline became clear. Rosa, you don't really think Melissa would do something like this, do you? She's been my friend for years. Why would she want to cause problems with my housing? I don't know her motivations, Mom, but I know the pattern. Someone with detailed knowledge of your routine is filing false complaints designed to make your living situation untenable. The timing coincides with someone pushing you to move. This isn't coincidence. After I hung up with Rosa, I spent the afternoon in a state of anxious confusion. The logical part of my mind could see the pattern she'd outlined, but emotionally, I couldn't reconcile the idea of Melissa deliberately sabotaging my housing with the friend who'd been coming to me for support and companionship. That evening, Patricia knocked on my door. She was holding a small notebook and looked troubled. "Carmen, I hope you don't mind, but after our conversation yesterday, I started paying closer attention to the sounds in our hallway and keeping track of when I actually hear anything from your apartment." "What did you notice?" "I've been home all day today, working on a project that required concentration. I made notes every time I heard a sound that could potentially be attributed to your apartment. In 12 hours, I noted exactly 3 instances: your coffee maker this morning, what sounded like you vacuuming around midday, and your dishwasher running after dinner." She handed me the notebook, where she'd written down times and descriptions in her neat handwriting. "Carmen, these are completely normal apartment sounds. The kind of sounds every tenant makes every day. If someone is reporting these as noise violations, they're either lying about the severity or they have unreasonable expectations about apartment living. But here's what really concerns me." Patricia sat down on my couch, her expression serious. "I also made note of when I heard genuinely loud sounds today. Mrs. Chen's furniture moving, the Johnsons' teenage son practicing guitar, someone's television turned up too loud during the afternoon. None of those activities are being complained about, based on what management told you. Someone is specifically targeting your normal quiet activities while ignoring actually disruptive sounds from other units." "Patricia, can I ask you something in confidence?" I said, making a decision to trust her with my growing suspicions. "Of course." "If someone wanted to document my daily routine well enough to file complaints about specific times and activities, how would they go about doing that?" She thought for a moment. "They'd need to be able to observe or predict your schedule regularly. Either they live close enough to monitor your apartment consistently, or they have inside knowledge about your habits." She paused, studying my face. "Carmen, do you suspect someone specific? I'm starting to wonder about a friend who's been spending time here regularly. Someone who knows my routine intimately and has been encouraging me to move out of this apartment." Patricia's eyes widened. "You mean someone you trust has been in your home, learning your habits, and then potentially using that information against you?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message from Melissa. "Hey, I'm in your neighborhood. Mind if I stop by for a quick chat?" I showed Patricia the message, and she immediately understood the implications. "Carmen," Patricia said quietly, "this might be your chance to get some answers, but you need to be very careful how you handle this conversation." I stared at the text message, my stomach churning with a mixture of dread and determination. Patricia watched my face carefully as I processed what this meant. "She's never just in the neighborhood," I said quietly. "Melissa lives across town. She only comes here when she has a specific reason." "What are you going to do?" Patricia asked. I took a deep breath. "I'm going to let her come up, but I need you here as a witness. Would you mind staying?" I know this is awkward, but if my suspicions are right, I need someone else to hear whatever happens. "Of course I'll stay, but Carmen, promise me you won't accuse her outright without more evidence. If you're wrong, you could destroy a friendship. If you're right, confronting her directly might just make her more careful about covering her tracks." I nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. I texted Melissa back. "Sure, come on up. Apartment 4B. While we waited, Patricia helped me think through how to approach this. "Ask her about the complaints casually," she suggested. "See how much she knows about the specific details before you've told her anything." 10 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Melissa with her usual bright smile, carrying a coffee cup from the shop downstairs. "Hey, you," she said, stepping inside. She paused when she saw Patricia sitting on my couch. "Oh, I didn't know you had company." "This is Patricia, my neighbor from across the hall," I said. Patricia, this is Melissa, my friend I was telling you about. Melissa's smile flickered for just a moment before returning full force. Nice to meet you, she said to Patricia, though I noticed she didn't move to shake hands or sit down. Carmen was just telling me about some trouble she's been having with noise complaints, Patricia said conversationally. Such a strange situation. I watched Melissa's reaction carefully. Her eyebrows rose in what looked like surprise, but there was something else in her expression. Was it wariness? Noise complaints? Melissa said, turning to me. What kind of noise complaints? You're the quietest person I know. That's what makes it so weird, I said, settling into my chair. Apparently someone's been calling the apartment manager regularly, saying I'm disturbing other tenants. But the complaints are about really normal things. My coffee maker running in the morning, vacuuming during the day. That's ridiculous, Melissa said, but I noticed she remained standing near the door. Who would complain about those things? The manager won't tell me who's making the complaints, I continued. But they seem to know my schedule really well. Like they complained about me vacuuming last Tuesday at 2:30 in the afternoon. That's such a specific time. Melissa shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Well, I mean, if someone works nights or something, maybe afternoon noise bothers them? The thing is, Patricia interjected smoothly, I work from home, and I'm here most days. I haven't heard anything from Carmen's apartment that would warrant a complaint. But whoever is reporting these incidents seems to know exactly when she's doing specific activities. Maybe they have thin walls? Melissa suggested, but her voice sounded strained. I decided to test Patricia's theory. Actually, Melissa, now that you're here, maybe you can help me figure this out. The manager said the most recent complaint was about me supposedly moving furniture loudly last Saturday evening around 7 o'clock. But I wasn't even home Saturday evening. Remember? You texted me asking what I was up to, and I told you I was at the grocery store. The color drained from Melissa's face. I had never told her I was at the grocery store last Saturday. In fact, I had been home all evening, and she hadn't texted me at all. I don't remember exactly what we talked about, she said quickly. I text a lot of people. Patricia and I exchanged a glance. Melissa had just revealed that she knew specific details about a false complaint that I had deliberately made up to test her. Melissa, I said gently, is there something you want to tell me about these complaints? She stood frozen for a long moment, her coffee cup trembling slightly in her hands. Finally, she sank into the chair across from me, her bright facade crumbling. Carmen, I can explain, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not what you think. The silence stretched between us, heavy with tension. Patricia quietly set down her own coffee cup and moved to the window, giving Melissa and me space while still remaining supportively present. Then explain it to me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Because right now, I'm completely confused about why my friend would be making false complaints about me to my apartment manager. Melissa looked down at her hands, wrapping them tightly around her coffee cup. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I never meant for you to get in actual trouble. But why? I leaned forward, genuinely bewildered. What could you possibly gain from this? She took a shaky breath. Do you remember when I was looking for apartments last year? I applied to live in your building. They rejected my application. I did remember. Melissa had been excited about the possibility of us living in the same complex. When she didn't get approved, she'd brushed it off, saying she'd found something better anyway. The manager told me they had concerns about my credit and employment history, Melissa continued. But then, a few weeks later, I saw online that they had available units again. When I called to ask about reapplying, the manager said they were being more selective about tenants, because they wanted to maintain a quiet, peaceful environment. Patricia turned from the window. So you thought if Carmen appeared to be a disruptive tenant, they might reconsider what kind of tenants they actually wanted, Melissa finished. I thought maybe if they realized that even quiet people can cause problems, they'd be more open to someone like me who's honest about occasionally having friends over or playing music. I stared at her, trying to process the twisted logic. Melissa, that makes no sense. If anything, you are just making them want quieter tenants even more. I know that now, she said miserably. But at the time, I was just so frustrated. I felt like they were discriminating against me for being young and social. I thought if I could show them that their perfect tenants weren't actually perfect. You were trying to sabotage Carmen's housing situation over your own rejection, Patricia said, her voice carefully controlled but clearly upset. Do you realize she could have been evicted? Melissa's eyes filled with tears. I never thought it would go that far. The complaints I made were about such minor things. I figured they'd just talk to you. Maybe you'd get a warning, and then they'd realize how ridiculous their standards were. But they weren't minor to me, I said, feeling a mix of hurt and anger building in my chest. I've been losing sleep over this, Melissa. I've been walking around my own apartment on eggshells, afraid to make any noise. I was starting to think I was going crazy. And how did you even know her schedule well enough to make specific complaints? Patricia asked. Melissa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Carmen posts about everything on social media. Coffee check-ins in the morning, photos of her cleaning, when she's going out, and sometimes when we text, she mentions what she's doing. I never thought about how creepy it would seem. The realization hit me like a cold wave. You've been monitoring my social media to spy on me. Not spying exactly, Melissa said weakly. Just paying attention. That's the definition of spying, Patricia said sharply. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. The betrayal felt enormous. Not only had Melissa been actively trying to cause problems for me, but she'd been using our friendship and my trust to gather information against me. Carmen, Melissa said, her voice pleading, I know I messed up. I know this was wrong, but I never wanted to hurt you. I was just so angry about being rejected, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I turned back to face her. But you kept doing it. This wasn't one phone call in a moment of anger. You've been calling my manager for months, making up detailed complaints, watching my routine. That takes planning and commitment to hurting me. When you started getting worried about the complaints, I wanted to stop, Melissa said. But I was afraid that if the complaints suddenly stopped right after you started asking questions, it would look suspicious. So instead, you decided to keep making my life miserable to cover your tracks, Patricia said, her disapproval evident. Melissa flinched. I was going to find a way to make it stop. I was working on a plan. What kind of plan? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. I thought maybe I could call the manager and say I was a tenant who had been making complaints, but that I realized I was wrong and that you were actually fine, Melissa said. Make it seem like whoever was complaining had come to their senses. The audacity of it left me speechless for a moment. You were going to fake being your own victim to clean up your own mess. I was trying to fix it, Melissa protested. By lying more, Patricia pointed out. I sat back down, feeling emotionally exhausted. Melissa, I don't even know what to say to you right now. This whole thing is so far beyond what I thought you were capable of. Does this mean you're going to tell the apartment manager it was me? Melissa asked, and I could hear the fear in her voice. The question hung in the air. I looked at Patricia, who raised her eyebrows but didn't offer an opinion, clearly leaving the decision to me. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need to think about this. Right now, I just need you to stop. No more phone calls, no more complaints, no more monitoring what I'm doing." "I promise," Melissa said quickly. "I'll never do anything like this again." "But what happens now?" Patricia asked, voicing the question I was dreading. "The apartment manager is still expecting answers about these noise complaints, and Carmen still has to live under the shadow of being labeled a problem tenant." Melissa looked between us, her face pale. What if I did call the manager? Not to lie about being another tenant, but to tell the truth? I could explain that I made the complaints by mistake, that I was confused about where sounds were coming from or something. "More lies," I said tiredly. "Or," Patricia said slowly, "we could figure out a way for you to clean this up honestly." But even as she said it, I could see the complexity of the situation settling over all of us. How do you undo months of deception without creating an entirely new set of problems? The silence stretched between us in my small living room, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sounds of life continuing in the apartments around us. I found myself listening for the first time in weeks, without the paranoid edge that had become my constant companion. No more wondering if my footsteps were too loud, if my laugh would trigger another complaint, if my very existence was bothering invisible neighbors who apparently didn't exist. Melissa sat hunched forward on my couch, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She kept glancing toward the door as if calculating escape routes, and I realized this was probably the first time I'd seen her genuinely vulnerable. Even during her worst breakups or work disasters, she'd always maintained this armor of confidence, this sense that she could talk or charm her way out of anything. Now that armor was completely gone. Patricia had moved to the window, gazing out at the courtyard where a few residents were going about their evening routines. She had always been the steadiest of us, the one who thought through problems methodically rather than reacting on impulse. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was processing not just the immediate crisis, but all its implications. "The thing is," Patricia said finally, still looking out the window, "this isn't just about making the complaints stop. The apartment manager has months of documentation now. They have a file on you as a problem tenant that doesn't just disappear because the complaints stop coming." The weight of that reality settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had been so focused on the immediate stress of being watched and judged that I hadn't fully considered the long-term consequences. "So, even if Melissa stops calling, I'm still marked as someone who disturbs other tenants." "Exactly." Patricia turned back to face us. "And if you ever need to use the management company as a reference for a future apartment, or if there's any kind of dispute about your lease renewal, this history follows you." Melissa's face had gone even paler. "I didn't think about that part." "Of course you didn't," I said, and I could hear the edge creeping into my voice despite my exhaustion. "You were too busy playing whatever twisted game this was to think about the actual consequences for my life." "It wasn't a game," Melissa said quietly. "I know it looks like that, but it really wasn't. I was just so angry, and then it spiraled so far out of control." Patricia came back to her chair, settling in with the deliberate movements of someone preparing for a long, difficult conversation. "Melissa, I need to understand something. When you made that first call, what exactly did you think would happen? What was your best-case scenario?" Melissa was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. I thought maybe they'd talk to her about keeping it down, and she'd realize that her actions affect other people. I thought it would make her more considerate. But I was never being inconsiderate, I said. I was living normally in my own apartment, walking around, having conversations, cooking dinner. Normal life sounds. I know that now, Melissa said. But at the time, it felt like you were being deliberately thoughtless. Like you knew I was right downstairs trying to sleep or work, and you just didn't care enough to be quieter. Patricia leaned forward. So, this was about feeling ignored? Feeling like your needs didn't matter to her? Maybe, Melissa admitted. When I called the first time and gave them that fake apartment number, I told myself I was just being a concerned neighbor. But when they said they'd look into it, I felt this weird satisfaction. Like finally someone was going to tell her that other people exist. The honesty was somehow both refreshing and infuriating. I could see the twisted logic that had led her down this path, but that didn't make the consequences any less real. But when you saw how stressed it was making me, why didn't that matter more than your satisfaction? Because by then, I was scared, Melissa said. Every time you mentioned the complaints, I panicked. And when you're panicking, you don't make good decisions. You just try to protect yourself. By making more complaints, Patricia said, her tone carefully neutral. Which made things worse. Which made things so much worse, Melissa agreed. And then I couldn't figure out how to stop without getting caught. It became this horrible cycle where every time I thought about confessing, I'd imagine losing our friendship, losing your respect, maybe even facing legal trouble for harassing you. So I'd convince myself to wait a little longer, to find a better way to handle it. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something with the restless energy that was building inside me. I walked to my kitchen and opened the refrigerator, not because I wanted anything, but because I needed a moment to collect my thoughts. The normal contents looked surreal somehow. Leftover takeout, a carton of milk, some wilting vegetables, evidence of the regular life I'd been living while my world was being systematically undermined by someone I trusted. The thing that gets me, I said, closing the fridge and leaning against the counter, is that you watched me change. You saw me become paranoid and anxious and afraid in my own home. You listened to me question my own behavior, wondering if I was really being as inconsiderate as these mysterious neighbors claimed. And you let me go through all of that psychological turmoil rather than just admitting what you'd done. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. I know. That's the part I feel worst about. Watching you doubt yourself when I knew the truth the whole time. But not bad enough to stop, I pointed out. No, she said quietly. Not bad enough to stop. And I don't know what that says about me as a person, but it's the truth. Patricia had been listening to this exchange with growing concern visible on her face. Melissa, what you're describing sounds like it went way beyond just anger about noise. You're talking about watching someone you care about suffer and choosing your own comfort over theirs, repeatedly, for months. That's not normal friend conflict. I know it's not normal, Melissa said defensively. I know I messed up. This is beyond messing up, Patricia continued. This is a pattern of behavior that hurts someone systematically over time. And I'm worried that if we don't address what really drove this, it could happen again. I pushed away from the counter and came back to the living room, but I didn't sit down. The conversation was heading into territory that felt both necessary and terrifying. What are you saying, Patricia? I'm saying that maybe we need to understand what was really going on with Melissa before we can figure out how to move forward. Melissa looked between us with growing alarm. What do you mean? Patricia took a deep breath. I mean that healthy people don't typically engage in months-long campaigns to psychologically torment their friends, even when they're angry. So, either there's something about your mental state that we need to acknowledge, or there's something about your feelings toward our friend here that runs a lot deeper than noise complaints. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. I could see Melissa struggling with something, her face cycling through emotions too quickly for me to track. Fear, anger, shame, something else I couldn't identify. Finally, Melissa looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. What if it's both? What if it's both? The words hung in the air like smoke, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Patricia leaned forward slightly. Can you explain what you mean by that? Melissa's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them together in her lap. I mean, what if I've been struggling with some things? And what if my feelings about our friendship are more complicated than I've been willing to admit? I remained standing, my arms crossed, trying to process what I was hearing. Melissa, I need you to be clearer, because right now, it sounds like you're saying there were deeper reasons you wanted to hurt me. I didn't want to hurt you, she said quickly, then stopped herself. No, that's not true. Sometimes I did want to hurt you, and that scares me. Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. What kind of things have you been struggling with? Melissa was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've been having these periods where I feel so angry about everything. Not just noise, not just small things. Everything feels overwhelming and infuriating, and I can't seem to control how I react to it. I uncrossed my arms, something in her tone making me pay closer attention. How long has this been going on? Months, maybe longer. I've been telling myself it's just stress from work, or that I'm just getting older and less tolerant of things. But the truth is, there are days when I wake up and everything feels wrong, and I'm angry before I even get out of bed. Patricia nodded slowly. And what about the other part? About your feelings regarding your friendship? This question seemed to cause Melissa even more distress. She looked up at me with an expression that was equal parts guilty and desperate. I think I've been jealous of you. Jealous of what? I asked, genuinely confused. Of how easy things seem for you. Your job, your apartment, the way you move through the world without seeming to struggle with basic things like I do. You complain about noise complaints, but you handle it. You research solutions, you talk to people, you problem solve. When I have problems, I just get angry and stay angry. I sat down across from her, processing this. Melissa, you know that's not how my life actually works, right? You've seen me struggle with plenty of things. I know that logically, she said. But when I'm in one of those dark moods, logic doesn't really factor in. All I can see is that you seem to have it figured out, and I don't, and instead of dealing with my own issues, I found a way to make you feel as confused and helpless as I felt. Patricia was taking notes on her phone, something she did when conversations got particularly important. So the noise complaints became a way to level the playing field, in a sense? I guess so. If I could make her doubt herself the way I doubt myself all the time, then maybe I wouldn't feel so alone in feeling lost. Melissa looked at me again. Which is horrible. I know it's horrible. I felt a weird mix of anger and sympathy. The anger I understood, but the sympathy caught me off guard. Melissa, what you did was horrible, but what you're describing, feeling angry all the time, and not being able to control it. That sounds like something you should talk to someone about. You mean therapy? I mean a doctor, maybe, or a therapist. But definitely someone who knows more about this stuff than we do. Patricia looked up from her phone. I think that's a really good point. And I also think we need to talk about what this means for your friendship going forward. The room got quiet again, and I realized we were approaching the heart of the matter. Everything we talked about so far was explanation, but now we needed to figure out what came next. I don't know if I can trust you again, I said to Melissa, the words coming out more bluntly than I'd intended. I know, she replied. I mean, now I know that when you're struggling, instead of asking for help or talking to me about it, you might decide to secretly sabotage my life instead. I understand why you'd think that. And I don't know how to be friends with someone when I have to wonder if they're going to turn on me the next time they're having a hard time. Melissa started crying again, but this time it seemed less about self-pity and more about genuine grief. I don't want to lose you as a friend. Then what are you going to do about it? I asked. What do you mean? Patricia jumped in. I think she means what concrete steps are you going to take to address both the mental health issues you mentioned and the jealousy and trust issues in your friendship. I don't know, Melissa said helplessly. Well, you need to figure it out, I said, standing up again. I was starting to feel restless, like the walls of my apartment were closing in. Because I can't just pretend this didn't happen, and I can't pretend I'm not worried it'll happen again. What would make you feel safer? Melissa asked. It was a good question, and I realized I didn't have a ready answer. What would make me feel safer? Could anything, at this point? I need to think about that, I said finally. But I know that sorry isn't enough. And I know that explaining why you did it isn't enough either. Patricia stood up as well. Maybe we should take a break from this conversation. Give everyone some time to process. No, Melissa said quickly. Please, I know I don't have the right to ask, but please don't leave yet. I feel like if we stop talking now, we'll never start again. I looked at Patricia, who shrugged slightly. The decision was mine. Okay, I said. But I want to know something first. You said you've been feeling angry and out of control for months. The complaints to my apartment manager started 3 months ago? Did you start targeting me because the timing coincided? Or did you specifically choose to take your problems out on me? Melissa's face went pale, and I knew immediately that I wasn't going to like her answer. I chose you specifically, Melissa said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat back down heavily, not trusting my legs to support me anymore. Why? I managed to ask. Melissa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Because I knew it would hurt you the most. Because I knew how much your independence and your apartment mean to you after everything you went through with your last roommate situation. Patricia made a sharp intake of breath. Melissa, that's what? I interrupted, my voice getting louder. That's calculated? That's cruel? That's the behavior of someone who wanted to deliberately hurt me? Yes, Melissa said, meeting my eyes for the first time since she'd started explaining herself. All of those things. The honesty was somehow worse than if she'd continued making excuses. I felt like I was seeing a completely different person than the friend I thought I'd known for years. So, when you called my apartment manager, I said slowly, you weren't just acting out because you were having a hard time. You were actively trying to damage my life. Yes. You wanted me to get in trouble with my landlord. Yes. You wanted me to worry that I might get evicted. Melissa's voice cracked. Yes. I stood up again and walked to the window, staring out at the parking lot below. Everything looked the same as it had an hour ago, but I felt like my entire world had shifted. "I need you to leave," I said without turning around. "Please, just let me—" "No." I turned back to face her. "I asked you a direct question because I needed to know if you were someone who made a mistake while you were struggling, or if you were someone who deliberately set out to hurt me. Now I know." Patricia looked between us, clearly uncomfortable but not sure what to say. "I'm not saying we can never talk again," I continued, "but I can't have this conversation anymore today. I can't look at you right now knowing that you specifically chose to target the thing that would scare me most." Melissa stood up slowly. "I know I don't deserve to ask, but will you think about whether there's any way we can work through this?" "I honestly don't know," I said. "A few hours ago, I thought you were my friend who had made a terrible mistake. Now I find out you're someone who planned to hurt me because you were angry about your own life. I don't know how someone comes back from that. The person who did those things isn't who I want to be," Melissa said desperately. "I know that doesn't change what I did, but I need you to know that." "The problem is," I said, "the person who did those things is exactly who you are. That's what I'm struggling with. This isn't something that happened to you, Melissa. This is something you chose to do." Patricia finally spoke up. "Maybe Melissa should go now, and you two can figure out if and when you want to talk again." "Yeah," I agreed. "I think that's best." Melissa gathered her purse and jacket, moving slowly like she was hoping I'd change my mind and ask her to stay. When she reached the door, she turned back. "I know this probably doesn't matter to you right now, but I already called the apartment manager this morning and told her I was wrong about the complaints. I told her I'd been mistaken about which apartment the noise was coming from." "When this morning?" I asked. "Right after I got your text asking me to come over." I felt a fresh wave of anger. "So you only tried to fix it after you got caught?" "Yes," she said quietly. After Melissa left, Patricia and I sat in silence for several minutes. I felt emotionally drained, like I'd been having an argument for hours instead of one difficult conversation. "That was not what I expected," Patricia finally said. "Which part?" "The part where she admitted she deliberately chose you because she knew how to hurt you most effectively. I thought we were dealing with someone who had acted impulsively, not someone who had strategized." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, that was a fun revelation." "How are you feeling about it?" "Honestly, I feel like I don't know who Melissa is at all. And if I don't know who she is, then I don't know what our friendship was based on." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. It's one thing to forgive a friend for hurting you accidentally, or in a moment of poor judgment. It's another thing entirely to forgive someone for calculating how to cause you maximum damage." "Exactly." I slumped back against the couch cushions. "And now I'm wondering what else she might have done that I don't know about. If she was capable of this, what else is she capable of? Have you noticed anything else weird or unexplained in the past few months?" I was about to say no when a memory surfaced. "Actually, yeah. Remember how I told you someone kept leaving negative reviews for the coffee shop I like? The owner mentioned it to me a few weeks ago because the reviewer mentioned specific details about things I'd said about the menu." Patricia's eyebrows shot up. "You think that was Melissa too?" "I don't know, but now I'm wondering." The possibility opened up a whole new dimension of betrayal that I hadn't even considered. What if the apartment complaints were just one part of a bigger campaign? The thought sat heavy in my stomach like a stone. I'd been so focused on the apartment complaints that I hadn't considered the possibility of other sabotage. Now that the idea was in my head, I couldn't shake it. I need to think through everything that's been going wrong lately, I said, pulling out my phone to make notes. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but better to be paranoid than to miss a pattern? Patricia agreed. What else has happened? I started typing as I talked. The coffee shop reviews, obviously. Then there was that weird thing where my gym membership got canceled and they said someone called claiming to be me. I thought it was just administrative error, but the person on the phone knew my member number and everything. Patricia frowned. When did that happen? About 3 weeks ago, right around the time the apartment complaints started, now that I think about it. My fingers moved faster on the phone screen. And remember when I couldn't figure out why I stopped getting invited to Sarah's book club? She said she'd been sending me emails, but I never responded. You never got the emails? No, and I checked my spam folder multiple times. But if someone had access to my email? I trailed off, remembering how often Melissa and I had used each other's laptops when we hung out. How many times had I left my email open on her computer, or logged in on her phone to check something quickly? The realization hit me like a physical blow. Patricia, I think I've been incredibly stupid. What do you mean? I mean, I've been treating Melissa like a sister for 2 years. I've given her my spare key when I went out of town. She knows my social security number because she helped me fill out forms when I was applying for jobs last year. She's been in my apartment alone dozens of times. Patricia's expression grew serious. Okay, let's take a step back. Don't spiral into worst-case scenarios yet. Let's figure out what we actually know versus what we're speculating about. But I was already mentally cataloging every strange occurrence from the past few months. The package that never arrived, even though tracking said it was delivered. The utility bill that somehow didn't get paid, even though I was sure I'd set up autopay. The date who stood me up after claiming I'd been rude to him over text, even though I distinctly remembered our conversation being friendly. I think she's been systematically messing with my life, I said quietly. Not just the apartment thing. Everything. Patricia reached over and took my phone from my hands. Stop. You're working yourself up into a panic, and that's not going to help us figure this out logically. But what if I'm right? What if she's been doing this for months and I've just been blind to it? Then we'll deal with it. But first, we need to separate facts from speculation. Patricia set my phone on the coffee table. Tell me about the email thing with Sarah. That's something we can actually verify. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Sarah said she sent me 3 emails about book club meetings. I never got them. When I told her that, she forwarded me the email thread, and there were responses that looked like they came from my account saying I was too busy to participate anymore. Responses you didn't send? Responses I definitely didn't send. They were polite but kind of cold, which Sarah said hurt her feelings. That's why she stopped reaching out. The memory stung. Sarah and I had been getting close, and I'd been confused and hurt when she suddenly seemed to lose interest in our friendship. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Do you still have those forwarded emails? Yeah, they should be in my inbox. I reached for my phone, but Patricia held up a hand. In a minute, I want you to think first about what you want to accomplish here. Do you want to investigate every possible thing Melissa might have done? Or do you want to focus on protecting yourself going forward? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on figuring out the scope of Melissa's betrayal that I hadn't thought about what came next. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to know everything she did. But part of me thinks that might just make me feel worse. Those are both valid feelings. But I think you also need to consider the practical side. If she's been accessing your accounts, you need to change your passwords immediately. If she has your spare key, you need to get your locks changed, The investigation into what she's already done can wait until you've secured yourself against future problems. She was right, of course, but the thought of taking all those protective measures made the situation feel more real somehow. It meant accepting that Melissa wasn't just someone who'd made a bad decision in anger, but someone I actively needed to defend myself against. "This is so surreal," I said. 3 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether my apartment manager thought I was a bad tenant. Now, I'm wondering if I need to treat one of my closest friends like a criminal. I know it's overwhelming, but you're not alone in this, okay? We'll figure it out, step by step. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. It was from Melissa. "What does it say?" Patricia asked, noticing my expression. I opened the message and read it aloud. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize there are other things I should probably tell you about. Can we talk again tomorrow?" Patricia and I stared at each other. The text felt like confirmation of my worst fears, but it also presented an opportunity I hadn't expected. "She wants to confess to more," I said slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe she wants to do more damage control. The question is, do you want to hear it?" I stared at the message, reading it over and over. Patricia leaned closer, her brow furrowed with concern. "What do you think she means by other things?" Patricia asked. "I honestly don't know, and that's what scares me." I set the phone down on the coffee table like it might bite me. "How much more could there be?" Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "You know, this reminds me of when we were kids and you caught me going through your diary." I looked at her, confused by the sudden shift. "That was completely different. You were 12. Was it, though? I mean, obviously the scale is different, but I remember how you handled it. You didn't yell at me or tell Mom. You sat me down and asked me why I did it. And then you listened, when I told you I felt left out of your life." The memory came back slowly. Patricia had been going through a rough patch in middle school, feeling like she didn't fit in anywhere, and I'd been busy with high school activities and friends. I'd been hurt about the diary, but I'd also realized she was acting out because she missed me. "This isn't the same thing," I said. "Melissa isn't some confused kid. She's a grown woman who deliberately sabotaged my relationships." "I know that. I'm not saying you should forgive her, or that what she did is okay. But the way you handled things with me, the way you tried to understand why I did what I did, that's who you are. That's your strength." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I don't feel strong right now. I feel stupid for not seeing what she was doing." Patricia moved closer and put her arm around me. "You're not stupid. You trusted someone you cared about. That's not a character flaw." My phone buzzed again. Another message from Melissa. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I really think you should know everything. I owe you that much." "She's really pushing," Patricia observed. "Yeah, and I hate that part of me wants to know what else she did. It's like picking at a scab." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said, "What if you didn't meet with her alone? What if I came with you?" I turned to look at her. "You'd do that?" "Of course I would. You're my sister. And honestly, I'm curious too." I want to understand what was going through her head. The idea of having Patricia there was both appealing and terrifying. Appealing because I wouldn't have to face whatever Melissa had to say alone. Terrifying because it would make the whole situation feel more serious, more real. "I don't know if she'd be honest with both of us there," I said. "Maybe not, but she might be more careful about lying or trying to manipulate you. Sometimes, people behave better when they know someone else is watching. I picked up my phone and typed a response to Melissa. I need time to think about this. I'll let you know tomorrow. Almost immediately, she replied, I understand. But Emma, some of this involves your family too. Patricia specifically. I showed the message to Patricia, whose face went pale. What could she possibly have done that involves me? Patricia asked. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Remember when you applied for that marketing position at the nonprofit last year? The one where you never heard back? Patricia's eyes widened. You don't think she? I don't know, but she knew how much you wanted that job. We talked about it for weeks. Oh my God! Patricia sank back into the couch cushions. I rewrote my cover letter 5 times. I was so excited about that position. We sat in stunned silence for a moment. If Melissa had somehow interfered with Patricia's job application, it meant her actions had hurt my family directly. The thought made me angrier than anything she'd done to me personally. Now I definitely want to hear what she has to say, Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled fury. I looked at my sister, seeing the hurt and anger in her expression, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about protecting the people I loved from someone who had proven she couldn't be trusted. Okay, I said, typing another message to Melissa. We can meet tomorrow afternoon, but Patricia will be there too. The response came quickly. That's fine. There are things she should hear anyway. Can we meet at the coffee shop on 5th Street at 2 p.m.? I confirmed the meeting, then set my phone aside. Patricia and I looked at each other, both of us trying to process what we'd just committed to. What if there's more? Patricia asked quietly. What if she did other things we haven't even thought of? Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mom's name, and my stomach dropped. What if Melissa's interference had extended to my family in ways I hadn't even considered? I stared at my phone as it rang, Mom's name flashing on the screen. Patricia watched me with concern as I hesitated to answer. Just pick up, Patricia said softly. Whatever it is, we'll deal with it together. I swiped to answer. Hi, Mom. Emma, honey, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Mom's voice sounded tired, which immediately put me on edge. I wanted to talk to you about something, and I wasn't sure if I should bring it up or not. Patricia leaned closer so she could hear, and I tilted the phone slightly toward her. What is it, Mom? Well, you know how I've been volunteering at the community center, helping with their fundraising committee? Mom paused, and I could hear her taking a breath. A few weeks ago, someone called the center and said some very concerning things about our family, specifically about you and Patricia. My blood ran cold. Patricia grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with alarm. What kind of things? I managed to ask. The caller claimed that you had been involved in some sort of financial impropriety at your previous job, and that Patricia had lied on job applications. They suggested the community center should be careful about having me volunteer there, because it might reflect poorly on their reputation. Patricia's face went white. Oh my God, Emma, she whispered. Mom, none of that is true, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You know that, right? Of course I know that, sweetheart. I told them it was absolutely ridiculous and that someone was obviously trying to cause trouble for our family. But Emma, the thing is, the caller knew very specific details about both of your lives. Things that only someone close to you would know. I felt sick to my stomach. Did they say who was calling? They claimed to be a concerned former colleague, but they wouldn't give their name. The whole thing felt very deliberate and malicious. Mom's voice grew firmer. I've been going back and forth about whether to tell you, but I decided you had a right to know. Has something been going on? Patricia was shaking her head in disbelief, tears forming in her eyes. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Actually, Mom, we just found out that someone we trusted has been making false reports about me to my apartment manager. And now it sounds like it's much worse than we thought. Who would do such a thing? Mom asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and anger. I took a deep breath. Melissa. My friend Melissa. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Melissa? Mom finally said. The girl you've known since college? The one I've met several times? Yes. We're meeting with her tomorrow to try to get some answers. But Mom, I'm so sorry this affected your volunteering. I can't believe she would drag you into this. Don't you apologize for 1 second, Mom said firmly. This is not your fault. But Emma, if she's been doing this to multiple areas of your lives, you need to be very careful about how you handle this meeting tomorrow. Patricia wiped her eyes and leaned toward the phone. Mom, it's Patricia. I'm here too. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry about this. None of what she said was believed, if that helps at all. The people at the community center know our family, and they were more concerned about who would try to spread such lies than they were about the lies themselves. Thank you for telling us, Mom, Patricia said. And I'm sorry your volunteering got affected by all this. The volunteering is fine. I'm more worried about what else this person might have done. Have you thought about whether she might have interfered with other things? I looked at Patricia, both of us thinking about the job application she'd mentioned earlier. We're starting to piece some things together, I said. It's bigger than we initially realized. Do you want me to come over? I don't like the idea of you two dealing with this alone. Patricia and I exchanged glances. Part of me wanted Mom there, but another part of me knew this was something Patricia and I needed to handle ourselves. I think we're okay for tonight, Mom. But thank you. Just knowing we have your support means everything. You always have my support, both of you. And Emma, when you meet with this Melissa person tomorrow, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't hesitate to walk away. After we hung up, Patricia and I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. She called the community center where Mom volunteers, Patricia finally said, her voice hollow. She tried to sabotage Mom's reputation because of something between you and her. This is so much worse than I thought, I said. It's not just about apartment complaints or job applications. She's been systematically trying to damage our entire family. Patricia stood up and started pacing around the living room. What if there's more, Emma? What if she's done other things we don't even know about yet? Then we'll find out tomorrow, I said, though the thought terrified me. And we'll deal with whatever it is. I keep thinking about all the times she was here, in this apartment, being friendly and normal. All the times she asked about my job search or about Mom's volunteer work. Patricia shook her head. She was gathering information to use against us. The betrayal felt overwhelming when I thought about it that way. Every conversation, every shared detail, every moment of trust had potentially been weaponized against my family. Patricia, tomorrow when we meet with her, I need you to let me do most of the talking at first. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I don't want her to shut down or get defensive before we get the full truth. Patricia stopped pacing and looked at me. You really think she's going to tell us the truth? I think she's going to tell us enough that we can figure out the rest. And I think having you there will make it harder for her to minimize what she's done. What if she denies everything? Then at least we'll know where we stand, I said. But Patricia, after tomorrow, regardless of what she says, I'm done with this friendship. Even if she has some explanation for all of this, I can't trust someone who would involve you and Mom in whatever issues she has with me. Patricia sat back down next to me. I'm scared about what else we might find out. Me too. But I'd rather know the truth than keep wondering what else might be happening behind our backs. We spent the rest of the evening going through our phones, looking for any other instances where Melissa might have gathered information she could have used against us. The process was exhausting and disheartening, but it also helped us prepare for what we might learn the next day. As we got ready for bed, Patricia turned to me. Emma, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I'm proud of how you're handling this. It would be easy to just cut her off and never speak to her again. But you're being brave enough to get answers. I don't feel brave. I feel sick and confused and angry. That's exactly why it's brave, Patricia said. You're doing the right thing, even though it's hard. Looking at my sister, I realized that regardless of what Melissa had done or why she'd done it, I was incredibly lucky to have family who supported me unconditionally. Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight, I had everything I really needed.